Fallout New Vegas is something everyone collectively loses their shit about. You can kill the president, join pseudo-Roman jocks who beat people to death with sports equipment, and even fulfill the strange fantasy of being a homeowner. It's hardly the first game of its type, but what makes it so good even by today's standards is the mountain of choices you can make and the story moments this leads to. Everything seems possible. Until it isn't. Sadly, Fallout New Vegas remains a video game and was written, allegedly, by humans. Baldur's Gate 3 though, now that is a game where you can do literally everything. Written and patched to afford all of the choices possible, it is the greatest thing since sliced bread. How do you want to slice your bread? Making moves on evil drow? Help some druids to defeat a nefarious cult? If you held some random girl in Act 1 and leave her alive, she is going to be back in Act 3. Insane. Turns out, you can't make Gortash and Orin fight each other. I mean, there's plenty of reason why they would. You can't tell Isabel that she needs to chill and not attack enemies, because the second she goes to 0 hit points, the combat cutscenes you into the worst setback in the game. You can't disguise yourself as any of the characters in the game using a spell called Disguise Self. I wonder if there is some kind of thing that would give you total freedom. The ability to do anything and have the world react to anything that you do. Dynamic and exciting. Okay, let's end this fast. It's called TTRPGs. There's a whole medium out there that lets you do exactly that, using the computing power of the human brain by using, allegedly, a human brain. I'm talking about D&D 5e because that's the system that I have most experience in, and also the system I've got the biggest gripes with. Spoiler warning right there. Let's get one thing right from the start. The fact that you can do almost anything in D&D is phenomenal. Like playing a movie, the ultimate realization of a choose-your-own-adventure book. Your choices matter in a way that no Telltale game could ever realize, and that is really, really cool. But one thing I have observed, and the thing I'm going to address, is that this is often the end of it. The novelty apparently never wears off. You can poison the noble's drink, you can roll on a wild magic table, you can play a Swarmkeeper Ranger with a weird swarm. Holy shit. And more. The world reacts to you. Your actions bring down the cult, your actions please the gods, your actions give you titles and money to buy items to do more heroics with. Sometimes you play an evil campaign. And isn't that fun? Yeah, it is. And I enjoyed myself the first few times. But over time, I began to get really, really bored. Another cult who do evil because of evil gods. Another corrupt noble. Another dungeon. Another dragon. This one collects books and is nice despite his scale colour. How innovative. What a cool world. What is wrong with me? Well, my therapist says a lot, but we don't have time for that. What I was missing is the dramatic element. Now, I'm not saying that every D&D campaign set in Faerun is narratively bad, but I am saying that D&D doesn't make it easy to do this well. I'm going to go into the way I like playing D&D, and I hope you might get something out of it. I will also do more with that in the future, but I wanted to explain myself and the way I get enjoyment out of the game before people yell at me that "What you're doing breaks the game, it's not proper D&D, it's not how I like to play the game, and therefore bad." So, to solve that issue once and for all, I'm going to explain what I like to call dramatic storytelling in D&D. And to answer all those screamers, yes, I'm breaking the game. The game serves my enjoyment and that of those like me. It deserves to be broken so that I might suck its marrow for my amusement. What am I missing from traditional D&D settings? What is this mysterious dramatic element? To answer this question, let's delve into some exploration about what makes good stories good. This question historically is very controversial. Everything about it is debatable, from the definition of stories to the ominous good. So, because of the screamers I mentioned before, I will not make a sweeping statement about that. Let me instead tell you what I think makes a good story. Memorability. If I remember a story weeks, months, years after I first encountered it, that is a damn good story. I can't remember any of the goblins I killed in Baldur's Gate 3, or what the generically good Harper's mission statement was. I don't remember why Tiamat is an evil dragon goddess, or what a Bahamut is, and believe me, I have looked it up. I don't remember my first PC's story, some tiefling bard who Sam Regaled way too hard, except for like, a temple? A flesh golem was involved at some point? Why do I not remember that? And why do I remember all the companions in BG3? I mean, hello? Pale, pretty vampire boy breaks the shackles of his evil vampire master. How many times have you seen that? Amnesiac who slowly pieces together that they're special in some way? Indoctrinated warrior wakes to the reality of other people. Toot toot all about the cliché train going right now. Why do I remember the religiously traumatized PC I played, but not my very first player character? I'm not nearly old enough for that to be the distant past, so there has to be another reason besides dementia. Investment. I was mentally invested in the BG3 companions. I was invested in my poor, sweet Charlie. I wasn't invested in any of the goblins in my first PC. Seriously, why do I need to care about Tiamat? Investment makes a vast difference when it comes to whether we remember something or not. If I care about something, I will remember it most of the time. As a GM, which I am for most of my games, I want my players to be invested and care about the story that's happening. I definitely don't want to reveal the name of the main antagonist, a being so powerful it could kill them all in a heartbeat, and have the response in a few weeks be like, wait, what's the evil dragon lady called again? Titania? There's a lot that both sides of the table can do to create investment. My players create memes of cool moments that happened. I make sure that big people in the world don't just have the agenda be evil. My players put a lot of time and effort into their characters, so when the bandit leader threatens to kill one of them, they're really invested not to let them die. This is a minor form of character bleed, where a player's emotions and a character's emotions mix, in a good way. Both the player and the character don't want the character to die. So far, so good. None of this is news. The internet is filled with videos about creating good characters, creating good encounters, 10 things to never ever not do when you're not the GM's friend's sister's cat, and so on. Dramatic storytelling in D&D is kind of all of that, but not really. It is the ultimate tool for creating investment, which draws on all of that. Every tip to make D&D a cooler experience, every create internal conflict for characters, every what does the bad guy want, ultimately serves to create dramatic storytelling. The problem is that it feels to me like many people out there don't know that that's what they're doing. A lot of videos and tips make the game so much cooler without touching on the root of where that comes from. They create investment without retaining it for a whole game. That's why often when people talk about their cool games, they talk about one NPC or a natural 20 they rolled that one time. Dramatic storytelling compels people to talk about the whole campaign, or one shot, or whatever it is that you want to run. How can you create this dramatic storytelling I'm talking about? Well, that's where the dramatic part comes in. Dramatic means, amongst other things, related to theatre, and before you run away, consider what theatre is really good at. Making you sit in a seat for 2 hours on end, sometimes without a break, and look at a story that's unfolding. You're not even in the scene, you're not even on stage, and still you're really invested in what's happening if it's done right. Now for many people, D&D and stage theatre is really far apart. D&D is all about choices and agency, while theatre is scripted. On a surface, they look vastly different. But there is a way to include all the good parts of theatre with all the good parts of D&D. That way, your players have all the agency in the world to spike noble strings and do what they want, and the story as a whole becomes something they're super invested in, something memorable. This type of story is not for everyone. There are players who want to hit the evil goblin, and that's fine. Personally, that type of game is my hell, but I want to have it stated that there is objectively nothing wrong with that. If you're that type of player or GM, don't take anything I have to say to heart. In fact, probably don't listen to this at all because it will make you angry. For the rest of us, the big element that creates a good story that we're all telling collaboratively is characters. I absolutely despise the way the 2014 Player Handbook talks about creating a character. On page 11, it says as an introduction to playing a role, "Your character is a combination of game statistics, role-playing hooks, and your imagination. You choose a race, such as tiefling or halfling, and a class, such as fighter or wizard. You also invent the personality, appearance, and backstory of your character. Once completed, your character serves as your representative in the game, your avatar in the Dungeons & Dragons world." This is the very first introduction a new player gets for what they're about to do. Your avatar in the Dungeons & Dragons world. The going definition for avatar is an electronic image, as in video game, that represents and may be manipulated by a computer user. That's not a role you play in this role-playing game. The PHB straight up tells you to put a self-insert character in there. Sure, it then goes on to hold a new player's hand when making a character by putting a step-by-step process in there using its flaws, bond, and ideals table to illustrate what counts as a personality. But most of those are the barest rudimentary goals that won't do anything for playing this character unless they're directly relevant to the scene. I owe my life to a priest who took me in when my parents died. Nothing can shake my optimistic attitude. I hope to one day rise to the top of my faith's religious hierarchy, and I am inflexible in my thinking, plus your class and race, apparently constitute as a fully prepped character, no questions asked. Let's take a step back here. Why is this so laughably bad? When actors play a character on stage, something that they need to know is, what does my character want? In any scene, this is the driving thing that makes their character interact with the world around them. If we know a character's goal, we can care about that character and what they do. If the character doesn't really care about what's happening, either because their goal is so specific that it doesn't matter most of the time, or because they don't want anything, don't have a goal, then we aren't invested. The same thing is true for D&D. If Tiamat isn't deeply relevant to my barbarian, why would I remember her? This fundamental problem grows even worse for the GM. If I don't know what your character cares about, therefore what you are invested in, how can I build a world or a story that will be memorable? Sure, players can be invested in stuff that their character isn't invested in, but that rarely happens and shouldn't be the expectations, because, let's face it, it's really hard to care about stuff that isn't important to you, at least indirectly. Dramatic storytelling is the opposite of this whole thing. In dramatic storytelling, the character has a goal so strong it is relevant to almost every single scene. Their backstory, flaws, bonds, ideals, their entire personality is always engaged because they are looking for a way in which the scene relates to their goal. How is this possible? Simple. Let us play some roles. Imagine a character that wants something. Anything. An apple, world domination, a kiss. Can you imagine this character meeting in a tavern, sitting there while the barkeeper drones on about this wolf problem the village has been having lately? No, absolutely not. They want that apple domination kiss, sure. Why would they give a damn about the barkeeper? Unless they went to the tavern because they knew the barkeeper isn't really talking about wolves. They're talking about a group called the Wolves, which the character knows are an ancient order of druids who protect the kissing fruit of power, or something. Suddenly, this isn't just a standard D&D encounter. The player character actually came to this village because they wanted something. Suddenly, the player and the character are invested. It's not a random tavern, it is the tavern. There is one important condition for dramatic storytelling in D&D. Everyone, all the players and the GM, must be aware that it is happening. They all want to tell a cool story and understand themselves both as actors but also as storytellers. I will talk more about the aspects of a story, how the characters relate to it and other things, but two things that absolutely need to be there to tell a story are storytellers and characters who want to do something. That can't be forced nor retroactively put into a campaign, at least not to my knowledge. What really is the difference between dramatic storytelling in D&D and a good old D&D game? In the good old D&D game, things happen because the setting says they do. Maybe because the characters want to do it. Maybe the GM does want to tell a story, and the players are happy to go on that adventure, playing out their own story arc in the meantime. In dramatic storytelling, everyone is on board to tell one larger story. All the characters still have agency, but instead of the GM wanting to tell a story, everyone is a part of this creation. The game becomes a stage, and the players are the improv actors who, together with the GM, tell a story about something. War, peace, love, betrayal, apple cults, it doesn't matter. What matters is that things are happening and everyone knows that they mean something. What that meaning is entirely up to you and your table. That's enough about the vague things involved in dramatic storytelling in D&D. The goal is to tell a compelling story involving every person at the table, not just create a simulation where you can kill X number of goblins for XP. How exactly do we accomplish that? The answer to that question is massive, and I won't be able to cover everything right now. There are still a few other things that absolutely need to be present for dramatic storytelling to take place. Let's do a numbered list. 1. Tone is everything. Perhaps the most important component to creating immersion and therefore investment in the story is tone. There is nothing that pulls you out of the game more than someone making fart jokes during a dramatic death scene of their beloved pet dog, or someone breaking out into Shakespearean monologue every time their character in the Christmas one-shot takes 1d4 candy cane damage. It's actually kind of tricky to establish exactly what tone is. I think the best non-academic way of putting it is, what's the vibe at the table? That can sometimes be hard to read, and while the GM is, in my opinion, mostly responsible for setting the vibes, the players have all the power when it comes to keeping it. It is therefore important to get into the right headspace during the game, and even during character creation. Consider what kinds of words are appropriate to use in the context of the tone, and to a lesser degree the setting. If the vibe is serious and philosophical, having a character remark on the dope-ass vibes of that villain dude isn't just a little slip-up, it can actually cause everyone else to stop being immersed, which will hamper their ability to genuinely tell a story that we all want to tell and are invested in. When I pitch a campaign, I give examples from popular culture that everyone is mostly familiar with. This helps people to create a character and style of engaging that works with the tone. Rather than going, oh, it's the setting of Star Wars, like you might be familiar with some kinds of GM going, I go, oh, I'm thinking of a game with the vibes of Rogue One mixed with Jedi Fallen Order, which, while taking place in the Star Wars universe, has a vastly different tone to, let's say, Star Wars The Clone Wars. Ideally, you can mix and match your pieces of media to give players a good idea of what to expect. One of my recent pitches was a short-term campaign with the tone of Peaky Blinders by way of Arcane, with a bit of Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn trilogy in terms of government oversight. People familiar with these pieces of media can immediately clock what kind of game it's going to be, and create characters accordingly. In addition, they can check in with themselves if that's the kind of mood they want to be in during a game. Lastly, when it comes to tone, the tone also influences the type of story you will tell. While nobody, not even the GM, will be able to completely foresee the story and its conclusion, a grimdark game by way of a Kamaga kill is unlikely to feature the story beat and then they all lived happily ever after. Even if all characters survive to the end of the story through luck, skill or combat prowess, that survival isn't going to be a happily ever after situation. It's a good idea to communicate with each other about the tone your game has, even if that game has already started, to make sure that everyone is on the same page. If you can do that, you suddenly find yourself at a table full of people who want the exact same vibe and tone in the game, meaning you will be able to improvise and roleplay much more effectively than if everyone just had their own little thing going on. It helps you keep the story that you're all trying to tell cohesive. 2. Plot structure. I'm not going to harp on much about this one because current discourse has already demystified and destigmatized the idea of games with a plot. The kind of D&D that allows players to do absolutely everything is usually, in my experience, a kind of game with player characters that are actually capable of doing anything. What that means is, inexplicably, the same character is capable of making two vastly different moral calls in almost the same situation, depending on what the player currently feels like. Even if that's not the case, and the character is ironclad in its consistency, a sandbox-style game assigns every interesting thing the same level of interesting. A villain and a random side quest can be equally as interesting to the players as well as the characters, leading to zero pacing, drawn-out fetch quests, and other such nonsense. With characters who have a goal, as discussed when I talked about the characters who wouldn't sit in a tavern doing absolutely nothing, you automatically get a plot. A character who has a goal, an entire party who has a goal, is both useful for the plot and a blessing to the GM. I don't have to worry about the party spontaneously deciding to delve into the crystal mines if I know that one of the party members has a raging murder boner for the city mayor. I can focus my planning on the aspect of the town the party is visiting, allowing for tighter pacing, which doesn't mean controlling the party. Railroading as a concept, which is what people sometimes use to refer to this way of running games, implies that somehow the players are less free in their decisions. That isn't true. The players and their characters can still do anything, but, as mentioned, we are all trying to tell an interesting story. Using the characters' goals and our collective desire to tell a cool story, we can all focus on creating interesting story beats by excluding irrelevant side stuff. 3. Consequences and drawbacks. This is the one where my personal style shines most, and perhaps the most contentious one. I would even go so far as to say that this one is the most optional. If you want to have a game that tells a light-hearted story, maybe with some humour sprinkled in for garnish, I advise you to use this particular brand of spice very lightly. For everyone else, that is where your meat and potatoes is, consequences and drawbacks. To understand why consequences are important to dramatic storytelling is easy, I think. We all understand on some level the reason why fights are interesting. You can die. But wait, there's more. If you ever felt like a fight was boring, even though it was plenty dangerous, the problem is most definitely found here. Death, while being the ultimate consequence, is also kind of boring. Once you're dead, nothing really happens, unless you're resurrected, which just makes you not dead. There is no true consequence. Now imagine a tournament at the royal court. Your character, a handsome sword fighter from mysterious origins, has come to participate for the prince's hand in marriage. The final fight awaits, and standing opposite you is Mustache McEvil Twirly, the villain of the story. To outright kill your opponent is prohibited, but whoever marries the princess will gain significant status and power in the kingdom, not to mention that the princess herself hired you to win this fight, seeing as she does not wish to be married to a man with such a horrid name. Suddenly, the stakes shift from dead or not dead to so much. You might disappoint the princess, the evil mustache might gain power in the kingdom, not to mention the humiliation at being beat by such a ghastly creature in front of all of the court. That was a small example of how consequences can make a fight impactful. In exactly the same way, clearly communicated consequences for player choices can improve the entire game. If players feel like their decisions really matter, if characters live, die, rise and fall by the player's hands, then they will be more invested in the story, because the story is more invested in them. Consequences don't matter, however, if there is no failure state. Failing upwards, the idea that even rolling bad on a skill check should move the story forwards, is a well-known concept. For example, if you roll badly on a lockpick check, the lockpick doesn't break and leave you stuck in front of the door. No. It's much worse. You make noise while opening the door and suddenly the lord of the manor is alerted that something is off. This kind of a consequence propels the story forward while introducing negative consequences for a player action. That kind of thinking is how you can make sure that player actions are rewarded and penalized by applying their consequences to the story. Today it might just be a door for a single skill check, but tomorrow It could be a beloved NPC having a falling out with a player character over a morally dubious choice they made. That kind of back and forth is what makes a story dramatic. 4. The mechanics serve the story. We've all heard of the rule of cool. When a player attempts to do something daring, cool and interesting, even when the mechanics don't outright state that it's possible to do it in that way, many GMs will allow it anyway. That instinct, that the story outweighs the mechanics, is the right instinct to have for dramatic storytelling. All too often D&D 5e's mechanics work against the story you're trying to create, either as a player or as a GM. All rogues are proficient in dexterity saving throws and have trained with a slew of weapons. All fighters have trained with every weapon in existence and are tough. These simple examples, and there are a lot more, highlight the problem that D&D 5e was written to tell simple video game-esque stories. What if you want to play a physically frail fighter who overcomes their birth sickness to be a great battle master like their mother before them? Well, too bad, your hit dice are still d10. Sure, you can lower your con modifier, but chances are you're still quite a bit healthier than the healthiest wizard. That was an exaggeration. Stay away from me, Bladesinger con monsters with tough. I know you're out there, I know you're possible, I am simplifying. Among my players, I'm a little bit infamous for rewriting mostly every aspect of the system, from classes to settings to spells to martials. I'm currently working on overhauling every single class, for example. You don't have to be that drastic, but with a good understanding of the mechanics, you can make them work for you. If you're a GM, I encourage you to think drastically. If you're a player, I encourage you to think more outside the box and ask your GM if things are possible. Why shouldn't your fighter have the rogue saving throw proficiencies of dexterity and intelligence instead of the fighter ones? Why stick to exactly the skill configurations your class gives you? Is having a stealth proficiency instead of a survival proficiency as a fighter game-breaking? Absolutely not. Does it fit your character and the story you want to tell? Yes? Then go ahead and break the system. Just fully snap its back. The mechanics in dramatic storytelling exist to tell a story, and if they are a hindrance to that, then they failed in their purpose and must be disposed of. Be drastic. One of my favorite optional rules is swapping the main ability score of a skill to fit the situation. To excuse yourself politely and without attracting attention from a masquerade? Sure, you could physically sneak out, but why not roll a charisma-based stealth check instead of dexterity? Suddenly your bard, a master of social situations, can extricate themselves elegantly instead of being forced to sneak away in shame, hoping that nobody will physically spot them. All because of one little change. Why do clerics use wisdom? Is there some kind of divine mandate that those who follow a higher being must be wise? I would argue it fits many clerics that they don't question things, that they're susceptible to outside influence, that they're charismatic rather than wise and calming. If you create a cleric like that, just change your spellcasting ability to charisma. Maybe switch up those saving throws proficiency to something else. As long as you keep in mind that you have many concentration spells, so having proficiency in constitution saving throws will actually make you a little bit stronger, you can go nuts, provided your GM allows it, of course. Again, rather than having to play a character who pretends to blindly follow a deity that somehow, inexplicably, is really good at resisting both said deity and seeing through lies, you suddenly have a charismatic and blind idiot for a follower. The mechanics would have prevented you from playing that character, but bending them allows for a better and more dramatic story, the story that you want to tell, and now can, because you have bent the mechanics. That's it for now. I will be going into far more detail in the future, but this was a mission statement. I'm no longer content with seeing and playing games that are better, more open video games. I want choices, drama, stories that capture the heart and imagination. Dramatic storytelling allows us to do exactly that. It's not that difficult, and many people enjoy this style of game, but there's little that I could find that truly codifies this process and makes it a distinct form of play. The closest we get is RP heavy as like a game tag, and That's just not the same. There are many people who enjoy this form of play, and this is my attempt at forming a way of saying what we want. That's all for today. Happy storytelling, everyone.